And the last little section for our timeline tool is the ability to print it and export it to other programs so that you can use it perhaps in a report or a PowerPoint presentation, for example. Now, if you want to just print the timeline, you firstly need to make sure that you're in the timeline little window here. Just click anywhere in and that'll be fine. Then go to File and Print, and you'll see that it picks up just the timeline and wants to print by default in landscape because the shape of the timeline is a landscape shape. Choose how many copies and print, and away you've got your timeline printed. Now, as an alternative in the 21st century, we would really want to take perhaps a copy of that into another program so that we can build it into perhaps a summary report or a PowerPoint presentation, or even just send it as an attachment for an email. Whichever one of those options you want to go for, again, make sure you're inside the timeline little window, timeline tools format, and we have copy timeline as an option. In the drop down, you'll see for email, for presentation, and full size. You are effectively exporting the image of the timeline, and all that you're doing when you're choosing email, presentation, or full size is choosing the physical size of the image that you get. So for an email, we would go for a much smaller quality, which is why you say for email. Presentation and full size are effectively the same, so we can go for either of those options. Now, just before we choose any of those options, one other little thing you might want to do is you can't read all of these task titles. So we might want to increase the text lines that are available to your task bars. So we can go from 1, which is the default, up to, say, for example, 10. And then you get 10 lines through which are spread out the text for each one. That still doesn't help with a short one like that, where it's not very long, therefore the title doesn't quite fit. But obviously you can see it when you hover. Pull up Old Carpets does now fit because we have the space to spread out the title. But you could have up to 10, or you could go somewhere in between, whichever gives you the right presentation. So 1 actually seems to work okay because we can't read this very small one anyway, and this one, because they're too short as far as tasks go. Then we're ready to export. So it's copy timeline. Let's go for full size. And then all that's happened is it's copied the timeline onto the clipboard. We then need to move to another program. So let's go to Word, where I have a blank document waiting. Just going to reduce, I suppose, the left-hand margin and the right-hand margin so that when I paste, Control V, whatever you would normally paste with, I get my timeline appear. Now it's still too wide for paper, but I can resize until we get the right size. Now that resize, I went with the corners to keep things in proportion, and that's not quite giving me the right response because it's resized all the internal items. Let's instead paste again, Control V, and this time just resize using the left hand side so that things get reduced in size but not reduced in proportion. That way I can still read the individual task items in there. Some of the text boxes perhaps do need resizing a little more. Now that you've got it in Word, you can edit items. So I can resize that box. This one here perhaps just needs spreading out a little. You've got much more control than you had when effectively it was in Project. Because what's happened is it's pasted into Word as a lot of separate objects that are then adjustable. You could perhaps even do your coloring in Word rather than doing it in the timeline function in Microsoft Project. Any item that you can click on and select is then amendable. So I could change the background color, I could change the font color, I could perhaps even, because the options there, give that a slight twist just for presentation's sake, or maybe we can just undo to put that back. So I don't want the upper one, so just select and delete, leaving me with my timeline, which is just an extraction of the timeline from Microsoft Project. I can now use that in Word, perhaps inside a quite extensive report. So you make your changes, you make the timeline look as good as you want it to look, and then copy timeline for email if you're going to paste it into an email, for presentation or full size if you're going to use it in PowerPoint or Word.